will flag as well that we recording the meeting this evening. If at any stage you have any issues or concerns, please feel free to message Emmeline or Alice, and we'll make sure that we can cut that section, or that your face and your words won't be included. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all on, and I note that we are in different places across so-called Australia. I myself today am on the beautiful lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, where it is sunny, it's been raining, it has been humid, but it is a beautiful day. I would like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, acknowledge any First Nations people with us this evening, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening. My name is Ashley Streeter-Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the CEO and founder of Raise Our Voice Australia. I could not be more excited to be with you all this evening for our first community engagement event for 2024. And what an excellent topic and what excellent speakers. We've been doing Rover now for 3 years, and over that time we've graduated over 120 people from our training programs. We've received over 1,000 submissions to our Raise Our Voice in Parliament program and have amplified over 300 of those in our federal parliament, working with 80 politicians across the political spectrum. At the 3-year mark, it feels like a good time to be not only launching some new programs like our fantastic community and alumni engagement, but to stop and take stock. I think it's fair to say that where we were sitting in 2020 was quite different to where we're sitting today for what I think are a lot of good reasons. Back in 2020, we were in COVID, in the midst of the pandemic. We were still under the Morrison government. We hadn't had Grace Tame named as Australian of the Year. We hadn't had Brittany Higgins come forward with her allegations. We hadn't had the allegations raised against our then Attorney General, Christian Porter. We hadn't had a landslide election on which gender and issues of climate and integrity were key voting issues, which I think it's fair to say has been a huge change in our politics over the last little while. We now have the most diverse federal parliament in Australia's history, but I think it's fair to acknowledge that although it might be our diverse, we still have a very long way to go. It would also be remiss not to acknowledge that this is a year of big elections where we've got, let's see if I can remember them all, ACT, Tasmania, Northern Territory and Queensland, and the federal election will be called anywhere from August this year to May next year. So the importance of thinking about diversity and the kind of leadership that we value, particularly in policy and political spaces, has really never been more important. And not just the value of that leadership, but also how we're holding these institutions to account in creating spaces where people don't just survive, but they can thrive, and where it's safe for all people to bring their truest selves and their lived experience, and their expertise is being appropriately valued. Against this backdrop, Raise Our Voice is doing some thinking about who we are and the direction we're moving in. With the team last year, we confirmed our new mission statement, which is that we are mobilising young women and gender diverse people through campaigns, community and education to transform policy and politics to reach our vision of equitable democracy. Over the next couple of months, we will be putting some substance behind that strategic plan, coming out to our community and really checking in with you to ask how we can continue to support you on your leadership journeys, whatever that might look like. As well as launching our community engagement and alumni program for this year, we're soon to be launching our research report and also a number of learning modules in the lead up to the election. I'm so excited that we're kicking off this year's community engagement program with these excellent panelists and such an important conversation. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. And with that, I'll also encourage all of you to please share your social media handles in the chat. One of the things that we're really passionate about is building a strong community. So creating those spaces where we can engage and where we continue to champion, to amplify and support the work that we're doing, both within the Rover community and as individuals beyond that as well. On that note, again, a big thank you to you all for being here, and even bigger thank you to our panelists. And I will hand back over to you, Alice.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ash. So Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to our first community engagement of the year. I will be your facilitator today. My name is Alice. I go by they and them pronouns. And welcome to our panel on LGBTQ plus leadership in politics and policy. So to get into it, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists for today. So first up, we have Maeson. So with volunteer experience in community organizations, Maeson is always keen to use their skills for a social purpose. Maeson is passionate about providing safe spaces and platforms for young people to have their voice and be heard, be involved in their communities, and be able to explore their passions and their interests. Maeson works as a youth advocate at the Y, a role that empowers them to make sure the voices and opinions of young people are heard and respected at all levels of their organization. They also sit as chief editor and a contributor on the WhyNot Editorial Committee, working to ensure the incredible work of creative, powerful, and inspired young people is amplified in the best possible way. You can usually find Maeson planning their next camping trip, adding to their growing or entire bookcase of to-be-read books, and scrolling Facebook Marketplace for more furniture finds they absolutely do not need, which I think we can all pretty much relate to, or at least I can. So thank you for joining us today, Maeson. Then we also have Charlotte, who is in their third year of medical school at the University of Queensland. They're also currently studying a Master of Public Health at the University of Melbourne, focusing on health policy and global health. Their research interests vary, however, are centered around health equity and providing healthcare to marginalized populations. Their personal interests have been shifting as they move into the second half of their 20s after spending a better half of a decade as an elite athlete in rowing. They're currently a keen cyclist and attempting to learn Spanish. So thank you so much for joining us, Charlotte, and excited to hear from you. Then we also have Jasmine. Jasmine is a queer second-generation migrant living on Ngunnawal Ngambri land. Jasmine is a leader and an advocate passionate about disrupting traditional social structures and amplifying diverse voices and perspectives within leadership, policy, and greater society. Jasmine has extensive experience within the community sector where she currently works as a fundraising expert. Her experience and career path is underpinned by her rich history of various leadership positions within grassroots youth-led organizations. Currently, Jasmine is a director on the LGBTQ Domestic Violence Awareness Foundation board, which focuses on supporting LGBTQ victim survivors of domestic violence and abuse through awareness, education, and breaking down barriers to accessing help. Thank you all of you for joining us today. And I'm actually going to pose our first question to all of the panel, starting with Charlotte. So in a very broad sense, how do you think LGBTQ plus leadership impacts the activist space?
It's a really big question. I think LGBT perspectives only amplify and make activist spaces better. I don't think activism can be fully formed without like an intersectional approach. And obviously activism can't be, just white, straight people doing activism. So I don't know, I think queer agendas have always been pushing the envelope in activist spaces, which has been going on for hundreds of years. So I think, yeah, they have to be included in every activist space. And I know without it, you probably don't have a very good movement. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. I'll also spin it to Jasmine.
Wonderful. I really liked your answer, by the way, Charlotte. That was great. I think, LGBTQ leadership, it just enriches the space. I think LGBTQ leaders bring visibility to the community within the activist space. Having our presence, it challenges stereotypes, it normalizes diverse identities, and it demonstrates that LGBTQ plus people can be powerful, capable leaders in various fields, and not just within LGBTQ activism as well. So I think, just having our presence there, super powerful. But something I always like to note when we talk about having presence, visibility and representation, it's fantastic. It's great. It's something we've been fighting for a really long time, but it's not the be all end all. You can be in a position of power. You can be a leader. You can, be like, yep, that's it. I'm a leader in this organization. But if you're not doing something with that, if you're not actively using your position of power or influence to dismantle systems of oppression that affect not only the communities we belong to, but all the other communities that exist as well that are more marginalized than our communities, then your representation, it's not going so far. So I think it's really important that, you know, having LGBTQ leaders in the space, super important, but it's what you do with that. It's having that ability to enact meaningful change. And I think we always need to have community at the forefront of our mind, leave our ego at the door.
Beautiful. I love how both your answers brought in that community aspect of we all deserve a seat at the table and to have meaningful conversations. We all need to be there. So thank you for those. And I'll also pass the question over to Maeson.
Yeah, look, I think Charlotte and Jasmine's responses, pretty much covered a lot of why I also think having, LGBTQIA plus leaders in a range of different spaces is so important. I do think the value that queer people bring is, contributing to shaping the narrative of situations and changing attitudes through our own storytelling and through using our own voice, through our lived experience, having to come out in places that are often not welcoming and having to overcome all of those challenges. Even though it's, not necessarily a positive experience, what comes out of that is this incredible ability as young people and as queer leaders to take on those conversations and take on those challenges and tell our own stories and stand up for ourselves and for each other. And I also second Jasmine's point around even in spaces, I think Charlotte also mentioned it though, even in spaces where, LGBTQ plus rights and inclusion is not the focus of the issue at hand, that diverse lived experience of queer people, but also intersectionally is really important. There's a difference between being a leader who is also LGBT or being an LGBT leader, but the experiences that we bring bring value to all of those spaces, regardless of the conversation at hand.
Beautiful. Could not agree more. Thank you for all three of those amazing answers. Now, Maeson, you also mentioned the sort of barriers LGBTQ plus people can find themselves holding them back from engaging in policy and politics and activism. So what kind of barriers or challenges do you believe LGBTQ plus individuals face in rising to leadership roles, particularly in the youth activist space?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a number of challenges. The first one that comes to mind for me is that visibility and representation that we were talking about earlier. There aren't a lot of people who are openly queer in positions of power and in leadership positions, and we can acknowledge that. They definitely exist more than they want to say that it does, but we live in an environment that unfortunately in many cases is we've come so far in LGBT inclusion, but in some spaces we are going backwards. And so it is becoming more and more difficult to be out and proud and loud about who you are, and give the people coming after you the representation that they need to do that themselves. And so, yeah, one of those barriers that we really do need to overcome is if you have the ability and the privilege to do so, to be open with your identity and show the people coming after you that you exist and you are doing incredible work because of who you are. I have a lot of privilege. I'm white, I'm middle class, I have a job security, I have a roof over my head. I have a responsibility now to use that privilege to uplift other voices and bring other people into the room and get that visibility and representation where it belongs.
Amazing. I loved that part about uplifting everyone. We're all in this together to quote a very, very powerful film. And on that note, I'd like to pass over to Charlotte. So you're an athlete, you've been a professional athlete, and what organizations what do you believe organizations and institutions can take to promote greater diversity and inclusion in their leadership, particularly in areas that we don't really see a lot about on the news, such as sport?
Yeah. So I can really only speak to kind of my experiences within elite rowing, which was at the time when I was in it was a very homophobic place. It was really interesting. I was at Melbourne University in the center of like queer Australia, it sometimes feels, but this little pocket of the city was pretty homophobic. And so my activism in that space, or like trying to be myself in that space, was literally just being like, hey, I'm bi at the start. This is before I came to terms with my gender and things like that. And that was massive. And it was interesting coming into that space and thinking it would be more open coming out of high school. But it was hard because, like, I think, I don't know, there were obviously a lot of closeted people around me. And being in that space, it needed to be so much more connected to organizations. And this was 2016. And those organizations didn't really exist yet. Those people weren't doing a lot of work. And there was great stuff happening from like Pride and Sport Australia. And they were fantastic. But yeah, it's really interesting to reflect on. And I think sport's come a really long way. Like, you know, last year we saw like a nearly whole queer Matildas team, you know, come fourth in the World Cup. And I was, you know, thought that was the most spectacular thing that could have ever happened. We had, you know, Sam Kerr kissing her girlfriend on the front of the paper. Like, I don't know. And I think, you know, as much as that's fantastic, and I think that is the biggest thing that could have ever happened in this country, I think it's just ensuring that at every level there is policies around inclusion, particularly trans inclusion at the community level. Elite sport sometimes feels like a lost cause in terms of trans inclusion. It's not a lost cause, it's just a long journey. But yeah, I've just babbled a bit, but that's my thoughts on that.
No, that was amazing. And I love you highlighting the current conversation around trans inclusivity in sport. It's a very important part of our community to flag because there has been a lot of negative conversations around that. So how do you think people can change kind of the rhetoric around such kind of negative conversations in the LGBT community, especially like with sport?
With sport, I think, you know, good role models. I think trying to change people's minds about the things that they've been scared of in the past. Like, I think like fear in locker rooms was such a massive thing growing up for me. And in even when I was in like undergrad, which was like 2016, 2017, the idea of having like queer women and queer guys like in the locker room. So it's just dispelling the myths around safety. Like sometimes it's as simple as that, just dispelling myths. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's hard in terms of trans inclusion in sport. Like, so many people are so negative about it. So I think my perspective on so much activism is just come and meet people where they're at. There is no point trying to push something that they're not ready to hear yet, and just trying to be like, you're scared, you're frightened, you're obviously very aggressive about this, but like, I don't know, why don't I just talk to you about some people who have been in the sport, or like people who have transitioned, and just like that nothing has happened, or that they've just like lived their lives and been good at the sport that they've done. And I don't know, it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's a lot of like biological factors that come into elite sport particularly. But then a lot of that isn't actually science or evidence-based. A lot of it, like they use specific arguments around levels of hormones, and a lot of it actually doesn't have a scientific basis. But anyway, it's just trying to have conversations with people where they're at, and yeah, going from there. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. So a lot of the backlash I've seen has come out from a lot of conservative institutions. So to Jasmine, how do you believe LGBTQ plus leaders can navigate such backlash and opposition from conservative or even anti-LGBT plus groups, whilst also advocating for the communities and looking out for themselves as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think knowing that it will happen, unfortunately, it will happen, and it will hurt. I think don't underestimate or downplay the impact of this particular type of violence and that it will have on you as an individual or a member of your community. I think, you know, when I think about my leadership journey, so I'm a woman, but before that, I'm a queer woman. And before being a queer woman, I'm a woman of color who is queer. And throughout my career, I've experienced backlash and opposition from people even within the movement. And so I think that that's really important to note. That backlash and opposition is not just going to come from conservatives or anti-LGBTIQ groups. A lot of the times it comes from within progressive movements, and that's when it can be most painful as well. people who are meant to be allies, who are working towards the same cause as you, in those progressive spaces. And also, receiving backlash based on, the communities that I'm not only advocating for, but also I belong to. So this creates a very different kind of hurt. I think it's really important for us to remember that when we're advocating for our communities, we're not only just advocating in a work sense, we're fighting for our own existence, our own human rights, and this is really exhausting. So I think, it's good to remember that if you're part of a marginalized group or groups, and you're advocating on behalf of those groups, you can't just switch off when you go home. If we're doing this, especially for job, volunteer capacity, we don't, as people who belong to these groups, we don't just go home and be like, okay, I'm done for the day. Great. I'm just going to switch on Netflix and just be fine. Of course we do that from time to time, but often you're open your phone and you're mindlessly scrolling Instagram. And what are you going to see? You're going to be reminded that unfortunately there are people who do not want us to have equal rights, people who, want members of our community, and I'm sorry for bringing this up, but I think it needs to be said, dead. So just today on my lunch break, I opened my phone to find out that Next Benedict, a non-binary First Nations child, was murdered in the US based on their gender identity. No school staff called ambulances. All respect and condolences to Next and their family for this horrific murder. And I think, any gender diverse people or First Nations people who might be feeling the effects of this too. But this is the type of reality that we live in. So we experience that vicarious trauma. So I think my advice to you is to protect yourself. We go through this world, with so much to give, there's so much beauty in our identities, but there's also so much additional pain that we can't escape. Like I said, especially if you add, other intersecting identities to this picture, being a First Nations person, being a trans person, being a person with disability and so forth. Therefore, I think it's really important to know when to step back, to sit in the pain, to feel it, to cry, and when to take a break and when to stop. And lastly, I think finding solace in community. Community care is imperative. Community care will absolutely save us. We need to band together, surround yourself with community. I think, as a queer woman of color, it's really important for me to be around people who look like me, who speak like me, who think like me. I think that this type of representation, I love my heterosexual friends. I love them. I love my white heterosexual friends. They are great, but they're never going to understand my experiences on that level. They can empathize, but they're never going to understand. So we need to feel seen. We need to feel heard. So creating that community around you and that sense of collective care is just absolutely key. And that's going to provide you with support during this period.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more, especially around the community. And when the personal is political, you don't always get the opportunity, specifically when you're out and proud, to shut off. But on that note, how can people who may not necessarily be part of the queer community be allies and help support those who may be feeling just all the hurt and all the pain?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic to ask. I think, not relying on queer people for emotional labor is really important. Google's there for a reason. There's so much resources. Instagram is never ending. TikTok is never ending with resources. So, you can reach out there and educating yourself as an ally. It's so important to educate yourself, and not just on, one perspective, following, one queer person from one queer background. No, that doesn't cut it. I think, you need to go out there. You need to look for diverse experiences of all different people from all walks of life. Because that's where you're going to get that really enriched sense of education. So making sure, you educate yourself, making sure that you check in on your queer friends, especially, during periods like this, especially with that news of Next, I think, it's really important to check in without, once again, not asking any questions, not asking for that emotional labor, but how are you going? Things have been rough at the moment. I'm here for you. Buy them a coffee, give them a hug, whatever you can do for support. I think it's that real sense, once again, collective care. I think bringing it back to collective care, what can you do to make their life a little bit easier? As well as using your voice as well. If you see something in a workplace, around your friends, you speaking up, you saying something can make all the difference. I always bring it back to the Audre Lorde quote. I literally have it tattooed on me. Your silence will not protect you. So, you need to use your voice. You need to speak up on behalf of the communities that, exist, that you love, that you care for, that you might not belong to, but you need to speak up.
Thank you so much for that answer. So I'm going to pan it over to Maeson now and move away slightly to how queer individuals as leaders, what kind of qualities or experiences, in your personal opinion, you believe uniquely equipped LGBTQ+ individuals for leadership positions, particularly in advocacy?
Yeah, look, I think anyone can be a leader, right? And I'm not sure, there are a lot of qualities that are unique necessarily to LGBT people that make them especially great at leadership. But I think the important thing is when we're advocating for groups and for people, communities, we always have to come back to that favorite phrase that we throw around: nothing about us without us, right? When we're advocating for LGBT rights, justice, inclusion, LGBT people absolutely have to be not just a part of the conversation that's happening, but like leaders and partners in the work. I think we have to challenge. When we look at the traits of a leader, especially leadership in the times that we are in now, and Jasmine, I appreciate you bringing up the situation with Next. Like, anti-trans hate is rising across the world. There's we live in a post-referendum world. We need to look globally at situations that are happening over in the Middle East, in the Congo, in Sudan. But the traits that push those movements forward, things like courage, bravery, organizing, building community. There are nobody that know these things better than Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? The fact of the matter is, like, all of the grassroots social media movements, all of the leadership that's happened, that has made this world that I live in safer for me to exist, were because of Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so, as a leader, for myself, my job is to listen to those people. And listening and active listening is probably the biggest quality and the biggest skill that I think all leaders should have, and use the platforms and the networks that I have at hand to give the space over to other leaders. I think also building community, as Jasmine said, is absolutely important. Advocacy and leadership is all about solidarity, right? It's about collective liberation for all of us. Jasmine quoted Audre Lorde. I'm going to quote Angela Davis now and say, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? We've all got something about our identities, whether you are like the straightest, whitest conservative man, there is something about you that a big group of the community isn't going to like. And so, you're not safe unless all of us are safe, right? So yeah, we really need to be building community, building partnerships, building coalitions to tackle this big wide world together.
Amazing. I love you bringing forth that sense of community again, and also the discourse that will come about with just engaging with anyone in current society. So how do you believe we can get people to start engaging, particularly in this time of increasing polarization, engage with safety and respect for each other?
I think just, again, listening is the biggest point that I would say. We live in the social media generation, and hundreds and thousands of incredible activists and educators are doing free, unpaid labor to educate people on their experiences, and push for change and call out for change. And so if you aren't an expert in something, if you don't know about a topic at hand, you see something in the news and you have a gut reaction to it and you want to question why you have that gut reaction, yeah, go and listen to people who know what they're talking about. And then also share that information on, right? It's all about passing it on to our community. So we got to get local. When we're thinking about these global issues that are happening and this intense global landscape that you're in, as we said, getting local and talking with people in your direct, like your neighborhoods. We've got to bring back neighborhoods. We've got to be talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, learning together, bringing everybody close to us along on the journey.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. Starting in your own backyard is just an amazing way to go about this. And with that, particularly, a lot of us come from different backgrounds and also different institutions. So I'm also going to pass this over to Charlotte. So, Charlotte, through your time with the University of Queensland Rainbow Med Committee, what are some effective methods you saw for holding political and academic leaders in particular and institutions accountable for their treatment of LGBTQ+ individuals and issues?
It's a tough one. Like, I came from Melbourne University doing a Master of Public Health before I started medicine, and it was a completely different world. Like, all the lingo, all the progressive language just was right there. Everyone could speak that language. And then you come into medicine and it kind of feels like starting from scratch. So many of the academics, so many of the students as well, have no understanding of queer issues, of race issues, of Indigenous issues. And it just is like literally starting from zero. So I think kind of repeating what I said before, which is like, you have to really meet these people where they're at, and they might be incredibly intelligent in their niche area of gastro or like cardio or like whatever their interest is, but they might know literally nothing about queer health or queer rights or the history of our community. And it's kind of not assuming that they know a lot without making them feel dumb. And I know that sounds a little bit facetious to say, but it's kind of being like, so like, I'm here to talk to you about this topic. Where are you at with that? Like, how can we speak about that together? Like, do you want to talk to me what your understanding of that is? And then sort of building from there. I think there's still a lot of opposition to proper queer inclusion, particularly with older doctors, and understanding the issues that face LGBTQIA people and pretty much every intersectionality within medicine. It's very, very not under research, but just under applied. Like the research is there, but doctors a lot of the older ones are so entrenched in their views that it's impossible to get to them at times. But yeah, persistence is probably the best technique for them. They're busy people. And yeah, meeting them where they're at and just, I don't know, trying to talk to them in a way that doesn't make them feel unintelligent. Because I think the one thing about the medical space and the academic space is there's a lot of ego around, and I think we've probably all experienced that. Trying not to trigger that ego or trying not to get them offside is probably my biggest bit of advice. Yeah, not to be facetious. Yeah.
Amazing. And how do you think institutions such as universities can generally go further to support, LGBT plus students and also staff to really help them feel protected and safe?
Yeah, I think it's obviously having the policies in place around, I don't know, there's so many different ways in terms of like adequate like maternity leave for parents, things like that, like ensuring that pronouns options are in every form and making sure that they're used and reinforced and that sort of thing. Like, yeah, I don't know, there is so much within the academic space that could be done in terms of students. I just think like listening to students is such an important thing, and I think that academics aren't very good at that, and institutions aren't very good at that. And they're getting better at it, but there's still so many assumptions that people in power know better than students, and particularly medical students, that hierarchy is so embedded and so strong. Yeah, and I can only really talk from that angle, but it's yeah, it's really hard to come against. But yeah, a lot more needs to be done. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Also, just in the medical space, so medicine and health has been used to demonize queer people historically, particularly casting people's minds back to the HIV/AIDS crisis and also the recent monkeypox scare that became a homophobic whistle.
Yeah.
In regards to that, how do you believe people in medicine can work to help educate and defend the queer community against kind of fake news?
Yeah, it's hard, and it's really challenging because obviously a lot of medical professionals have to redo training, but a lot of them don't actually have to go out of their way to understand things like the AIDS crisis or the ongoing monkeypox crisis or the ongoing impact of COVID on queer communities and marginalized communities. So what was I saying? Yeah, so I think, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. But in terms of, medical professionals cannot be like across it. So sometimes I feel like a lot of people need to be like almost educating medical professionals around things like monkeypox. Like an interesting anecdote was one of my like doctor tutors were talking about monkeypox, and he had no idea that it was sexually transmitted. And it was just like, why didn't you know that? So I don't know. I think a lot of the medical space is just trying to get basic information to lots of people and awareness campaigns about things. And like, I'm in my mental health placement at the moment, and there is so much like marginalization of queer people like, in our history in terms of the mental health space. And it's just trying to understand kind of the intersectionalities and the history of like queer pain in the mental health space, and ensuring that mental health diagnoses aren't used to kind of demonize us and make us seem, I don't know, like queer people can present and live lives that are different to the rest of the population. That doesn't mean they should be pathologized. And for a really long time, obviously, trans people and their identities were incredibly pathologized through medicine. And that was a terrible, terrible history that still is perpetuated by a lot of psychiatrists and a lot of medical professionals. Like, so many doctors still have really outdated views about trans people and our access to, hormones and affirming care. Like, I told an interesting, this will be my last bit and then I'll move on. But an interesting story to another tutor being like, that a lot of trans people just tell you the story that they know you need to hear to get the care that they want. Like, a lot of like doctors say that you need to say that you've been feeling like you're another gender or gender diverse your entire life. And that they'll tell you that story to get what they need. Like, queer people are smart. Like, we know how to work a system to get what we need. And you think that you're working, like, you think it's the other way around, but it's not. And I don't know, I think it's just an education that sometimes medical professionals believe that, as someone who will be a medical professional, believe they are all knowing and all powerful, but it's sometimes not that way. Anyway, I'm done.
Thanks for that. I really love you bringing in that personal narrative of conversations you've had yourself in the space.
It's bad out there.
It sounds rough. It sounds like a rough one to navigate constantly. But on that kind of note of personal narrative, Jasmine, what role do you believe storytelling and personal narratives play in queer activism and political leadership?
I love that question because I think storytelling, so in my day job, I work in comms and fundraising. So in order to affect hearts and change minds, it's really important to incorporate the element of storytelling. And I think, when we're talking about activism and advocacy, storytelling, it humanizes things, right? So when we're able to put somebody's face to something, somebody's words, like verbally, to be able to hear somebody, have something tangible, even just read it, that in itself is just so powerful. It's going to allow people to empathize a lot better. I think the same-sex or marriage equality, referendum was a good example of this. So one of the reasons why we know that it was so successful is because of the power of storytelling. So we had some fantastic advocates and change makers working on this. So many different people, you can't even name them all. But I think some of the people that get forgotten in that are the everyday people, the everyday LGBTQIA plus people who are just having conversations with their family and friends, who are having, their families were having conversations on their loved ones' behalf to their, to friends that, might have otherwise voted no. And they were talking about their child or their partner or their, whatever, their friend, their loved one. And so people were able to then really empathize and realize that, LGBTIQA plus people aren't so terrifying and scary. And maybe giving them this, this right is going to be okay, and it's not going to be the end of the world. So I think, there's a real power in storytelling and effective storytelling in being able to really connect to people on a human level. And I think that that's something we can definitely integrate into all of our activism and advocacy work, especially when talking to policymakers and people in positions in the government as well.
Beautiful. I really love that humanization aspect especially to people who would not necessarily believe they're engaging with people who are part of the queer community, but also helps people in the queer community who may not necessarily be out see themselves represented in daily life. They don't have to be some great, incredible person. They can just be themselves. So thank you for bringing that up. So on that note, though, with especially grassroots-led activism, Jasmine, how do you see the relationship between grassroots activism and institutional politics in advancing LGBTQ plus rights and representation, particularly in politics and government?
Sorry, can you repeat that? It just froze for me. What was that?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you see the relationship between grassroots activism and institutional politics advancing LGBTQ plus rights and representation?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that the role of grassroots movements is so powerful. So having been on both sides, so I started a lot of my early days in the space in grassroots organizations, volunteering for youth-led organizations, holding leadership positions there. And I think, a lot of the time there can be stigma. There can be stigma in more established spaces like community organizations and, not-for-profits funded areas and institutions as well, that, grassroots are just, a bunch of students getting together and, trying to build their resume. That is a stigma, and I think it's an important one to know, but it's completely wrong, because there is so much change that you're able to make at that grassroots level. I think some of the most impactful change I've been able to make is within those movements, and within, places that weren't funded or places that were heavily volunteer led or driven, because you don't have all that red tape. You don't have all that bureaucracy that you have to deal with. You don't have people who might be in positions of power who've been there for a really long time, who have a very set way of doing things that you have to try and, you have to try and get them on side. So I think that there's so much significance in grassroots organizations and movements. And I think that often, because it is driven by a lot of young people, we just have a different way of communicating. We have a different way of approaching people who are policymakers, people who are government officials. I think that sometimes we, will go beyond what the normal kind of protocols are to do that. And as a result, it has a bit more impact. And I think there are a lot of people in those positions who really respect that. They really respect that the time is often volunteered, or the time is, maybe not as highly like paid or, secure as other people who they're dealing with on the day-to-day. So they'll have a lot of time for you. And so you'll be able to really connect with them once again on a human level, and you're able to enact some change there. So I think hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you sparked on the second question that I'm going to pass to Maeson on how can young queer people get involved in activism and changes within the community?
That's a great question. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, is get local. But this time I'm going to talk about local government. I think local government it's so much more important in advocacy and change making than I think we give it credit for. And a lot of our lives our daily lives are actually impacted by the decisions that local government makes. So my recommendation would actually be to get involved with your local council. Going to council meetings it's quite boring, I'm not gonna lie. But see what they're talking about. If you've got something to say, you can ask to be heard at those. That's what they're there for. Vote in your local council elections. It's not a legal requirement to vote in local council elections like it is for like state and federal elections. And so young people especially don't often vote in those elections. They're just not paying attention to it, which means that older generations before us who maybe have different ideas of what is important to them, they're the ones whose voices are getting heard more than young people. So definitely start voting in your local council elections, and join local community groups as well. I can almost guarantee you that every local government area has either like a youth group or an LGBTQIA plus social group, or activist group that you can join, or you can start your own. Absolutely do that as well. But, you know, imagine if every local community in Australia had a team of young queer people pushing for change, and bringing along other people on the journey. The power and the chorus of voices that would be, people in state government and federal government, they'd be forced to listen just by like how loud that kind of movement would be. So yeah, absolutely. My main advice for that is, yeah, get local.
Thank you so much. I definitely think that local governments get forgotten with the romanticization of the federal government, particularly. So thank you for flagging that again. I am now going to open the floor to anyone who would like to ask a question. So feel free to put a question in the chat or turn that camera on and open your mic and pose some questions.
I will also say, while we're waiting, you can also run for council. I unfortunately rent, and I've moved like local, like different suburbs over the last 12 months. So I'm not like eligible to run for local council, but I am desperate to see more young queer people of color in council positions. So absolutely encourage that.
I'm happy to ask a quick question while we wait as well. We were talking before this started about like testimonies and the power of storytelling, and I'm really interested in this for you as queer activists, how stories go into your advocacy work, but also how you protect your story in that process as well. That fine balance between sharing your story because it's a useful educational tool, but understanding your own privacy and safety as well as other people's as well.
I'm happy to answer that one. So that's a fantastic question. And working in the domestic and family violence space, I think there is a lot of pressure for all victim survivors, and in particular LGBTQIA plus victim survivors, to share their story, to be seen as valid. And that is terrible. You know, there's often the stigma that if you're not sharing your story, then you're not somebody to believe and you're not compelling, and so you need to do that to be a valid victim survivor. So I think when I'm talking about that space in particular, we really need to move away from that narrative of you know, that sharing your story. It is important, and people do want to be seen and heard, and there are people who want to come forward with their stories, but you know, like you said, Emmeline, there's also the need to protect yourself, especially in those spaces, especially, you know, the complexities surrounding having perpetrators who are still out in the community, and how that might interact with your experience. So I think moving away from that need to share your story in the media as well, the media perpetuates it so much, you know. So just talking about a current issue that is clearly happening, but in terms of everything that is happening in Palestine, there is a lot of sexual assault that has been occurring, and there is a bit of a media narrative that is, you know, well, we haven't heard the stories, where's the evidence, you know? And so because of that, victim survivors aren't believed and they're not heard. And so I think that, yeah, we need to move away from that narrative in the DV space, and we just need to believe victim survivors when they say this has occurred to me, and you can create much more you can create effective change without having to share that either. You can talk about the impact in a broad sense. You can talk about the statistics. Although that being said, we don't have a lot of statistics. Data collection is absolutely abysmal when it comes to LGBTQA plus experiences of domestic and family violence and sexual assault as well. So if anybody wants to go into research, please do, because I really heavily encourage that. We need more research. We have this massive issue within our community that we don't even know exists as a community for the most part, and we have no idea how to address it because we don't know the magnitude of it, because we haven't collected the data on that. So, you know, the more data we can collect, the more, you know, the more impact we can collect, the more we can move away from that need of sharing your story.
Thank you. All right. I see a hand. Hannah, what's your question?
Hey, thanks, Alice. I just found this conversation, this panel, to be really informative. Going forward from this, and this is putting you a bit on the spot, but I was wondering if there were any kind of social media advocates that you could put their handles in the chat, or even if your own social media, if you use that in the advocacy space, it would be really good to kind of keep this conversation alive in that kind of way.
I'll have to go through my Instagram follower account and start tagging everyone.
It's a little bit on the spot.
I'll type some up.
Yeah, feel free to.
Yeah.
That's amazing, guys. Thank you. And that's a really wonderful question. We've also got one from our socials. And the question, I'll just pose it to everyone whilst you're typing as well. So do you feel that our political environment is a safe space, and how can we make it better for queer people to interact with?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's that safe of a space at the moment. I think that's pretty obvious to a lot of people. I don't know, how do we make it a safer space? Again, obviously we've got like lots of different levels of politics, but yeah, if someone wants to have a solution to making politics safer for queer people, I think they can be Australian of the Year. But I don't know, I think it's just trying to get politicians to see us as people and like understanding our stories. Like I just go back to like Yasmin's stories about storytelling and just understanding that we are people who just live very normal lives a lot of the time, or don't live very normal lives, live lives that are completely different to them, but doesn't mean that we are any less deserving of rights or access to health and stable housing and every right that a human deserves. Yeah, I don't know, someone else take over.
It is a massive question, and I think it's it's even broader than just making the space safe for queer people, right? Like, it's we've seen Ash mentioned it earlier in an opening around the Brittany Higgins story, and we know that politics and it's not safe for women, it's not safe for queer people, it's not safe for Indigenous people at the moment, God no. So I think I don't know how we make politics safe, I'll say that, but I think it does come back to grassroots activism, and that building community from the ground up. We know that change needs to happen from both ways. It needs to have top-down policy change, and that kind of work. Absolutely, it also has to come from the bottom up. I think if we can somehow take back or reinstate this actual idea that, hey, if you're elected to a position, as a political representative, that means you are a representative of like a bunch of people who are all wildly different. And so it's I can't remember the politician who said it, but I think it was in regards to the referendum or something last year around how it's really hard to craft a national story for such a diverse country, but it is actually the job of politicians to do that, something that includes us all. And if I guess that sentiment somehow can be carried through to the rest of our political representatives, we might start to see the ball moving more in that direction. Yeah, I don't know. I think also, sorry, now I'm rambling on a bit too. There is, young people who are trying to get into politics and are facing these barriers, and they know that it's going to be a struggle for them. I think wrapping around these people that are doing that hard work and putting their selves on the line, how can you support young people who are running for political positions, not just to get into those positions, but also to be successful in them, and make the change that they want to make. So using our power as individuals to support people who are electing to be in those positions of power.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. So on that note, especially with that call to action about change happening in our neighborhoods, to quote Maeson's words, I'd love to wrap up our panel discussion there. Thank you so much to all our panelists. So Maeson, Jasmine, and Charlotte, thank you so much for the stories you shared today. And all your answers have been absolutely incredible. On this note, I'd like to pass to Emmeline to re-engage us about what the Rover community engagement is all about.
Great, thanks Alex, and thanks to our amazing panel. I'm Emmeline and I'm the co-head of community alongside Alice, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I first just wanted to start with this very quick wrap up because I know we're running out of time here, by thanking Charlotte, Maeson and Jasmine for your amazing conversation today, and Alice for facilitating. I think one of the main things I got out of today's discussion is that it's not simply about fixing people or even empowering people and giving them confidence, but it's about challenging the structures and the actual systems in place, whether that's top down or ground up, that oppress queer people and often violently slow. At Rover, in our community portfolio, we're trying to challenge the concept of the old boys clubs that just lift up white men. So we're building a community of young, diverse people who are passionate about challenging these power structures and amplifying young people's voices in policy and politics. So in terms of plugging the alumni network and the community network and how you can stay involved with Rover, we've got our community newsletter. If you head to our website, you can sign up and subscribe. And that's where we share cool opportunities happening in our community, provide updates on Rover, and give a spot for young people to write about what they're passionate about as well. For our alumni, we also have a Facebook group where you can connect with one another, and you can find that link on our socials and website as well. In terms of what we've got planned for the year ahead, this is our first event of this year, and it's been an amazing one to kick it off with. So thank you for that. We're particularly interested in providing skill building and professional development opportunities for our Rover community post-training program. We're currently in the process of organising online workshops focused on how to write an op-ed, activist burnout, actually just learning the 101s of Australian politics and public service. And these workshops are going to be led by experts and have both live and recorded options similar today. For our next event, we're going to do a Budget 101 event prior to the budget release in May. So this is going to cover the basics of the federal budget, which as an English major, I'm really going to appreciate being able to understand it more. And Ash is going to lead that event, who's our CEO at Rover. And we'll be specifically asking what the budget is and what it means for young, diverse people as well. So please keep your eye out in our socials and our newsletter for more information on that event. You can follow us on our Rover socials at Raise Our Voice Australia, and you're also welcome to email Alice and I on community@raiseourvoiceaustralia.com. Before we wrap up tonight, I know Hannah is really keen to get a group photo of everyone who's joined us today. So if you feel comfortable, you don't have to, but feel free to pop on your camera and we'll just do a little picture.
Yeah, I might just do like a 3, 2, 1. Feel free to pose or just give us a smile, whatever you like. But yeah, thank you so much again for today. This has been great. And yeah, okay, everyone ready? Thank you for turning your cameras on. Not looking the best at maybe 7:30 at night, but I really appreciate it. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you for that. Back to you, Alice.
Gotta get the picture, otherwise it didn't happen. All right, well, that's it from us. I'm conscious of all your time, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our amazing panel. Please stay in touch with Rover community because we'll have amazing events in the future. Thank you.